Leafs get set to take on the Flyers again, but we'll have to do it without Jake McCabe. And we get a small update on the Martin Tavares contract situation. This is a Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs centered podcast, hosted by myself, David Morassutti. And joining me today is a good friend of the show, Frank Stanisci. Frank, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here with you. I always enjoy these Leaf talks with you.
Yeah, I appreciate you helping me because, as you can tell, I'm playing a little hurt. Some of you that may have noticed on the last show, my voice was not very strong, and it hasn't gotten any better. And we were going to try to do a show this morning. I said, I got to push it. I got to get my voice somewhat better. It's not great, but it's at least good enough to record. So I appreciate Frank for joining me. As you know, Mike is on vacation. Let's hope he doesn't come back in the shape that I came back in this time around. So I appreciate you stepping in, Frank, and helping me out.
I really appreciate it. And I'm up to the challenge. Help you hear voice what's going on with the Maple Leafs.
At least I'm ready to go this time. I didn't have my water with me last
Okay,
time.
have your water. And yeah, I got to tell you one thing I will say before you start, and that is that it really is an exciting time for Leaf fans. And I think the most important thing that I think one can say about the Leaf season thus far is there have been lots of questions this year, like there are every year, you know, with what's going on with the Leafs, whether it's goaltending, whether it's contracts, any of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. But the one thing about this year that's different, even when the Leafs play badly, they come up with a winning formula, which is something that I think is really important for a team that has aspirations of going deep in the playoffs.
It really does. And before we go any further, Frank, I do want to talk today about today's show sponsor, and that is FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And we've hit the midway mark of the season. It's kind of, I wouldn't say it crept up, but it's kind of hard to believe we're already at the halfway mark. There's been so much going on with this Leaf season. You've got the Austin Matthews injury. You've had the goaltending duo of Anthony Stolarz and Joseph Woll proven to be pretty formidable. Obviously, the uncertainty of the injury bug between the two of them has created sort of some rifts, but I would say we've seen a lot more positives than negatives. Considering this team is tops in the Atlantic right now, among the top teams in the Eastern Conference, you're right, Frank. There's a lot of reasons to be excited about this team, but also with all the excitement comes with the worries. And right now, the big worry is no Jake McCabe. We know what happened to him in the last game, where the unfortunate incident with Garner Hathaway, the fight led to him leaving the game with, they're not diagnosing it as a concussion, but it looked very concussion-like. And so not surprising to see he was placed on injured reserve when the team's going on the road. You're going to have to create some roster space to bring in an extra body. Right now, that's Marshall Refi was recalled. And I had Austin on the show, the last show, just to kind of figure out where would the Leafs go if they don't have McCabe. How would things change? And we said the likelihood would be Oliver Ekman-Larsson going with Chris Tanev. And that's exactly what the Leafs are doing. The line rushes at the morning skate suggested that OEL and Tanev will be the pairing, with Timmins drawing into play with Benoit. Are you, though, surprised, Frank, that maybe the Leafs didn't consider putting Morgan Rielly with Chris Tanev and that they just decided to keep those two apart?
Morgan Rielly is a bit of a sore spot for me. I love the guy. Who doesn't love his attitude? He's a Leaf through and through. He'll do anything he possibly can to be a part of winning. But the one drawback with him is that when I think of a shutdown defenseman, I don't think of Riley. I am answering your question, by the way, maybe in a long roundabout way. I don't think of him as a prototypical shutdown defenseman. I also, once you subtract that goal he scored to win in overtime, I don't think of him as a prototypical offensive defenseman. What that means is, in a team like this, where they really are task oriented, in other words, under Berube, players have responsibilities. They are part of the machine, and the machine has. It's not one of these ones where you throw in a guy that does general things. And unfortunately, he is a general kind of, he's like a Swiss Army knife. But the problem is, to go with a guy like Tanev, he has to have qualities that Tanev doesn't have. He has to do the kind of offensive things that an offensive defenseman does, or a quick puck moving defenseman. Now, I know there might be some people who disagree with me, but I just don't think that Riley is that good offensively on a consistent basis. And that's what Tanev needs. He needs a consistent guy that knows how to pass the puck. So to answer your question, that's why I don't think he's there. And the problem is, you can't put him with an offensive defenseman because he's a defensive liability. And this is, before he scored that goal, I could have full-throated here, criticized him, and made a case for trading him. I could have done that. But he scored that goal, so he's bought himself a little bit of time. But my problem with Morgan Rielly is he doesn't do anything really well. He does nothing really well. He does a lot of things well, very well, but he doesn't do anything really well.
Well, I think that's the big one right there with Rielly is people like, well, if he's an offensive defenseman, the numbers need to be better. He needs to be that offensive defenseman. And, he's not done a shutdown defenseman, so you can't, as you said, you can't put him with like a Connor Timmins or an Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Because Oliver Ekman-Larsson, while he's played a more responsible game, he's still a player that thinks offense first at times. So that pairing just wasn't really working out either. I do, when I consider Rielly, I don't know if it's a confidence thing. I don't know if it's maybe he was dealing with an injury thing. I think it's probably more confidence and new coach. He doesn't want to take maybe the unnecessary risks that have put him in bad spots in the past. But yeah, they clearly need him to step up a bit. And like with Jake McCabe out, yeah, OEL is going to get the assignment with Tanev. But this is, I think, an opportunity for Morgan Rielly to really step up a little bit more. It didn't really happen when McCabe was out last time. I'm hoping maybe this will galvanize the team a little bit more to have a better, thorough. Like, I don't want to see the drop off, right, that we saw the last time with McCabe out. I think that's always the concern. Defensively, there's been some ups and downs the last few games. They've been winning, but it hasn't been clean. And I'm sure that's something Craig Berube is going to want to see.
Yeah, Berube has to see consistency from his player that he puts on the ice. He wants, if we've learned nothing else in this, in this first half of a season with Berube as coach, he needs a player to perform in a certain way consistently. He doesn't have a problem with sitting people, and he doesn't have a problem with giving people extra work. Look at Nylander. A lot of people would criticize that he's not as well. Recently, he's looked a little more like the old Nylander, that he seems as a little bit uninterested, but he's willing to give, Nylander the carrot, to basically give him extra ice time on the power play. That doesn't work. Well, okay, I'll put Marner in there for the extra time on the power play, a full 2-minute shift in the power play. So Berube's doing some things outside the box that basically say, and I think is important, and that is you can develop a system, but you have to have the players to play the system. So what that means is, if you only build a system with the idea that you're going to plug and play, that may not work. So what he has to do is understand who he has in the lineup and do with them what he can, depending on each player. But if that player isn't consistent in what, there's an expectation level that Berube has as a coach. When he puts a guy out, he expects that guy to do that job and do it well. we see players in the Leafs who get in problems, or the players who, when we've seen a few players get out of the lineup, it's because they haven't done something the way he expects them to do it. So they end up out of the lineup until they understand they have a responsibility and they have to do it, because he believes in the theory, and I kind of agree with him, and that is that no player should be asked to play outside his game, because soon as that player starts playing outside his game, problems develop. So you got to stay within your game, play your own position, stop wandering, and if you do wander, then you're not going to be in the lineup. Now, the better a player you are, the more he'll put up with, as we've seen this season, which is, again, that's all about figuring out what players can do and develop the system around the players you can do. Have the main part of the system decided, but tweak it so that the players can play that system. That's what the Leafs have done really well, and that's why even when they're going through these horrible, what looks like slumpish kind of behavior, they still come up with a point or two. So, but that's all to the credit of the system that the Leafs have applied this year.
Yeah, no, I think the systems have played a big part in helping this team through these moments for sure. And we're going to see how that system plays out tonight when the Leafs take on the Flyers. There are some lineup changes other than on the blue line, so we're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, plus more contract talk. Because that's the favorite thing. Favorite thing here in Toronto is more contract talk. So we'll discuss just a little update on the two biggest ones that may impact the Leafs going into next year. That will come up here next on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. You can bet on the Leafs tonight against the Flyers. Will Austin Matthews finally get on the goal sheet? Do we want to bet on Matthew Nyes to continue his goal run? You can do that all on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season memorable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti, joined with me, Frank Stanisci, good friend of mine. You can go fit and check out his content, Candid Frank Live, on his YouTube channel. You have that website up yet, Frank? I know you were working.
No. We're running into a few hitches a little bit. Yeah, a few. But I hope it will be up soon. But thanks for asking.
Yeah, and Frank does quite a few shows, live shows. If you're looking for more sports content, him and I do some CFL stuff. He does some. If you're into lacrosse, he's got a lacrosse show, and there's some good daily content if you're looking for more content. Now, we do have some Leafs content coming up tonight. They are back against. This is a weird thing where when they played the Islanders at home, then they played the Islanders away. Now they're doing the same thing against the Flyers. Play the Flyers at home. Now they're going to play the Flyers on the road. And it's not very common you very see that. I guess it's just the way that the scheduling worked out. And the Leafs did make a few changes at practice or in the morning line skates. And I was curious if they were going to make one move just to kind of help address with the physical part of the Flyers game, and they did end up doing that, and that is bringing in Ryan Reaves. He will be on the fourth line. I'm going to pull up the lineup right now, thanks to David Alter, who tweeted out. So these are the four lines that the Leafs have for tonight. Top line remains the same. Matthew Nyes with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. Second line gets a little bit of a change. Bob McMahon gets bumped up to play with John Tavares and William Nylander. With that change, meaning Max Pacioretty is now on the third line with Max Domi and Steven Lorentz. So Nick Robertson is going to be coming out because the fourth line is going to be Connor Dewar, David Kampf, and Ryan Reaves. Now, what I appreciate of this lineup isn't just that they're going to bring in Ryan Reaves and that's going to try to solve the physicality of that part. It's that Bob McMahon gets moved up Now, Max Pacioretty's brought physicality,
Mhm.
but I think McMahon brings two things. He brings intensity and I think more defensive awareness. Because the last few games, I didn't get a chance to talk about this on the last podcast, but as good as Patrick, Tavares, and Nealer have been, it has been quite stale the last few games. Ever since they reunited Nyes with Matthews and Marner, I felt like there's been a bit of a drop off, especially in Nylander's game. McMahon's been very good. With Robertson out, that lineup's already been kind of changed a bit, so it kind of makes sense to balance things out a little bit. But what do you think of the decision not only to have Reaves in, but also to move McMahon up?
The coach said, we need to be more physical. I'm going to do my part. I'm going to put Ryan Reaves in. But the message was sent. And Pacioretty's moved now onto a line where he's on a line with three. There are three guys now with two other guys that are pretty physical, David. They're two very physical guys. So now what he's going to create in this game with the Flyers, he's going to have punch and counter punch. So he's going to have his offensive lines, right? And then he's going to have two lines he can send out, either or. Because the fourth line now with Reaves on it, the 3 and 4 lines now for the Leafs are the lines that he can send out when he thinks maybe there needs to be a little adjustment in attitude by the Flyers. And if there isn't an adjustment, the right person is going to be involved in the fight. What I didn't like about McCabe, if I can just take a little side trip, because this has to do with what you're talking about, McCabe shouldn't have gotten in that fight. Hathaway didn't want to fight him. It didn't look like he wanted to fight him. And that was a great opportunity for them to put that on hold until the next game. They knew they were playing him and playing them again, playing the Flyers again. That little, if he didn't want to fight, Hathaway didn't want to fight, I think the perfect time would have been in this game where he gets challenged by Reaves and then, things are taken care of. I just don't think that it was a smart move on McCabe's part. And this is one time, and I'm totally usually not on this side of the equation, but he's one guy, a defenseman like him, that can't get out of the lineup because he lost a fight. And unfortunately, basically, that's what happened here.
It is unfortunate. And yeah, I think it kind of speaks to, when you don't have Ryan Reaves in the lineup against I'm a little surprised that Reaves wasn't in the lineup for the Flyer game, just because we know Hathaway, what he's going to do.
Absolutely.
We know what he's capable of. And I get it. The Leafs haven't exactly needed Ryan Reaves in the lineup the last little bit. It hasn't been an issue. But this would have been a case, I think Craig Berube realized they needed to kind of, I wouldn't say fix a wrong, but understand that they need to make that change. And so I do appreciate that they did make that change. And I'm curious to see how if we get more of a balanced lineup too. So I felt like the last couple games, especially the Leafs, against Boston, they were very good to start, but then there was moments where Boston had them hemmed in. I'm hoping that these changes will allow them to be a little bit more balanced, right? Going against Philly, who are going to be very physical. We know that. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how that all changes. Another thing that's happening on this trip is the Leafs are doing a mentors trip, where usually they have like the father's trip, the mother's trip. This time they're bringing everyone brings kind of chose to bring a mentor on the trip. So we know that Austin Matthews brought Joe Thornton, former teammate, on the trip. I don't know. Now, Frank, you and
Gilmore and Clark are there too. Gilmore and Clark
were invited as well. Now, the connection that Frank and I have too is CFL head coach Michael Shea is on this trip. Now, I haven't seen anything to figure out why that is. I don't know who has that connection with Michael Shea. Maybe it's Ryan Reaves is a Winnipeg native.
Yeah, it could be him.
It could be him, but I'd be very curious to see, who he is kind of a mentor of. But it's interesting to do a trip like that, isn't it, Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first heard of it, it's easy to say the knee-jerk reaction would be, oh, here we go, a gimmick. But you know what? What now that you're thinking about it, and what you're saying right now is they're going to be around, other people like them, absolutely. But also, I think there's an opportunity there, and I think what they're calling it mentor. I think there's a mentor thing that can actually happen between those former players. Who doesn't know who Dougie Gilmore is? Who doesn't know who Wendell Clark is? And who doesn't know why those players are well known? Who doesn't know why Leaf fans love those guys? It's Berube and the Leaf organization saying, hey, guys, there's a reputation you can make here. You want to be more like these guys. This is your opportunity to be. And let's face it. I mean, this sounds egotistical on my part as a Toronto kid born in Toronto, making it sound like we're the greatest place in the world, other than we are. The fact is that you know what? If you're a great hockey player in Toronto, I mean, we have had players who played for the Leafs who great players like Darryl Sittler's a great player, but he doesn't stand close to a Lafleur or a Gordie Howe but because he was a Leaf. And this is an opportunity the Leaf players have. They're going to build their legacy. Everybody's watching here. As much as the pressure that people talk about as something that is a negative to be a Leaf because there's so much pressure, there is a reward. There's a reward for playing well as a Maple Leaf. There are people who are thought of as stars who played for the Leafs who weren't really stars in the game, but because Leaf fans have a very large, booming voice, their greatness is amplified a little bit. So yeah, the mentor thing's really important to send a message to the players that this is about pride. Essentially, that's what this is about. It's about pride. Mentors, they play the game with pride. And look at they bring in a CFL head coach, a guy who played tough and who has a lot of pride, and he knows how to exercise that pride. And that's what the Leaf team is, just a component, a mindset that they're trying to put in the Leafs as a team. And I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, it is an interesting idea, and I'm sure there's going to be other teams maybe that do something similar going forward. But it'll be interesting to see if hopefully the mentors will give some positive inspiration on this trip. The Leafs play the Flyers tonight, and I believe they have Carolina on Thursday. So
big game.
Be a good test to see if the mentors give them a little extra motivation for that one. On the other side, it's contract talk time. The Leafs have reportedly been keeping tabs on two of their bigger free agents. How much have they been doing that? We'll discuss that next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying twice? That definitely happened to me. I've had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize I was paying for. Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked on. Welcome back here to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti, joined here by Candid Frank Stanisci, and we obviously Mike is going to be gone for the week. We've got the mid-season. We're going to do a bit of a mid-season report card tomorrow on tomorrow's show. I wanted to bring up, I was going to do it on today's show, but that was until I listened to or saw a clip of Chris Johnston speaking about our favorite subject, and that is Leafs contracts. He was on the morning show on TSN 1050, kind of going through the ongoing dialogue that appears to be open between Mitch Marner and John Tavares. The Leafs have, exchanged ideas, but no official offers have happened at this point. So essentially, you see, I'll read David Alter, the Hockey News actually wrote out what Chris Johnston said. It's they haven't made any decisions. That this has to wait until the end of the year. My understanding that there's pretty ongoing dialogue between the agents for those players and the Leafs. It's not to say they're exchanging anything official at this point. I don't know if it's at that level, but I do think that it's a kind of process that's playing out. And look, sometimes when you have these talks, you find a middle ground and things kind of happen. But my question to you, Frank, is given where the Leafs are currently, I understand the cap is going up. Marner and Tavares are kind of going in opposite direction in terms of, I think, where they're going to be expecting their contract situations to go. Does it even make sense for them to push to get a contract done at this point?
They should always be discussing contract. There should never be a moment in time when the players don't think that they're not wanted by the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. That should never happen, first of all. Second of all, if you jump to the end of if I can go to the other end of the spectrum and say, well, how much are we going to pay these guys? Yeah. That's the ultimate question that comes up. Fans know how much they think they should get paid. The agents know how much they think they should get paid, and the team or the team itself knows what they think the players should be paid. First guess I'll say is they don't all agree. That's the first thing that I can guarantee you, that everybody has a different perspective on it. My perspective on it is that I have no problem with them keep talking and saying, look, we're going to talk about your money before next season. In other words, after this season's over. I would like to see them not sign a contract and not for the first time, the Maple Leafs not sign players for what they might do. I think these are two guys that can change the thinking with the Maple Leaf organization, where they're going to go back to old school. And that is, you pay guys for what they've done, not what they might do. Now, what have Marner and Tavares done? They've scored a lot of points. They've helped the team be very close in the playoffs. They've been in the playoffs every year. They've done a lot of great things. Here's the question I have. What's important? What's the priority for the organization? I say it's the Stanley Cup. It's what they always talk about. So you dangle that little carrot. You dangle the carrot. You say, here it is, boys. We're gonna sign you. No matter what happens after the playoffs are over, we're going to sign you. But we're going to be honest with you. How it goes in the playoffs is going to determine a lot of how much you make. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to take that chance? Are you willing to bet on yourself? But we're going to sign you either way. But we're going to let the playoffs tell us how much you're worth. Do you have a problem with that? And if those two players who have claimed very deeply that they love being a Maple Leaf, what's unfair, David, about deciding what the contract's worth by what you do in the playoffs? Because we all know nobody's happy with what the Leafs have done in the playoffs since Marner, Matthews, and company arrived.
Yeah, I think that's always the big thing with all these contracts have been handed out. And I think, look, Mitch Marner's he's on pace to have his best season.
Great year.
Right. Great year. But we know that he can do it in the regular season. I've been adamant on this, that I would rather see what happens in the playoffs before I even entertain signing that deal now. Because really, I understand, look, you run the risk if you don't get a deal done now. Does Marner feel like, you know what? They don't really want to put the priority on getting it done now. Let me go and see what free agency offers. Well, here's the thing. The Leafs can offer that 8 years if Marner wants it. But, I mean, with the way that contracts are going, not everyone wants the 8 years. I think the big thing here that the Leafs have to be careful with is everything's going so well right now that we get too bought into what's happening now versus when the real crunch time happens. And I think Leafs fans have obviously become a lot more aware of that. I think Prior Living has become aware of that to a degree. Now, yes, did he pay William Nylander a lot of money? Yes, he did. But guess what? Nylander, I think they dropped the ball on that a little bit by not getting it done earlier and maybe avoiding the point where he has a career year and you're just like, oh, now we're like running.
That's okay, David. That's okay. Yeah. My point is pay the guy for what he's done. Yes. I'm one of the guys originally that wasn't happy with Nylander and felt that he didn't offer the kind of effort that a professional should offer. He played in those playoffs, played really well. He earned that contract by virtue of what he did in the playoffs. That's what we're looking for. That's what Leaf fans are looking for, and that's what talking heads like you and I are looking for when it comes to the Maple Leafs. What are you going to do in the playoffs?
That's very true. And I mean, look, none of these star players have had star playoff performances. Nylander's been good in the playoffs, but like they haven't been superstars. And that's probably what Leafs fans are like. Well, if we're paying for superstar performances, let's see it when it matters. So I do agree that at this rate, you just let it happen. And
just let them know you want them. We want you. We just don't want to discuss contract during the year. How many players have said that?
Yeah.
And I think Marner's one of them. Remember Matthews? No, I don't want to talk about contract during the year. And that's not a tough sell. Let's talk about contract after the season's over. We can all agree on that.
Yeah. And look, Austin Matthews, they got it done before the season started when they got that deal. And he went on to have a great season, right? And so I think that's something that, the playoffs didn't work out. Injury played a factor in that too, and injuries are playing a factor now. Those are the risks you take with those deals. But I always say you're never bad to bet on your star players. Those are usually not always I mean, look, it can't be as bad as what's going on in Vancouver right now with JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, because
that's a chemistry experiment gone bad.
Yeah. So the Leafs don't have that problem. They just don't have the wins in the playoffs, right? But the hope is that now with these changes made and the shift in thoughts of how this team is built and how they play, they might actually end up being different. So we'll kind of see how that all ends, but I want to see it in the playoffs before I'd like to see it in the playoffs before this team fully commits to it.
I think also, David, the carrot isn't just for those two players. The carrot is for the rest of the team. I think the rest of the team love both those players. And what would be a better way to show how much you love those guys than play really well in the playoffs and have that extra little carrot dangled in front of you where you're going to help your teammate that you care about. We know how much Matthews and Marner's like each other, how they even refer to loving each other. This is an opportunity for the whole team to show how much they care about these two guys. And who, I want to know, please, who doesn't respect Tavares in the way he plays and the way he works so hard off the ice? Who doesn't think that guy's a great guy to support?
Yeah, anyone who thought that John Tavares wouldn't have been worth bringing back or even worth having those contract talks, guys playing at a point per game, I don't know where the Leafs would be if they didn't. Like some people were talking about trading the guy. I never understood that. I understand that the production isn't exactly $11 million, although I think this year it's been a lot better than it has been in the past, right? I think he's really responded well to being that, reliable two-way player at times too.
Awesome player.
Right. So I think right now we're liking what we're seeing. Let's just wait a bit before we.
My final point is this. It's a contract year for those two. And boys and girls, it's going really well.
Yeah. And I know we got Matthew Nyes' contract coming up too, that they're going to have to figure that out. There's a lot of contracts. They've been slowly chipping away, but at least they'll have less work to do when it comes to the off season. There are priorities to get done, but they don't have to do as much heavy lifting once they figure out what they're going to do with Tavares and Marner.
Yeah, I think they'll be fine, David, either way, whether they go deep in the playoffs or not, or win a Stanley Cup. If we all hear the beep, beep, beep of the Brinks truck backing up because the Leafs won the Cup and those two guys get their payday, I don't know of anybody within the Leaf organization, anybody in the fan base, anybody on the team, anybody on the organization would say they just won a Cup. Let's not pay those guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see how that all plays out. Thank you, Frank, for hopping on with me.
My pleasure, buddy. My pleasure. And get well.
Thank you. I'm going to try. So the plan is to not do a podcast after the game tonight. Probably going to do another morning one. I'm going to get a heck of a lot of sleep and a lot of fluids and whatever I can.
Absolutely.
To get over this cold.
There's a Brat formula. I don't know if you know the Brat formula. Anyway, you can look it up for something like this when you have this kind of sickness. So
might have to go with some strong stuff too to help push it forward. We'll see.
Oh, there you go.
I want to thank everybody for listening and for supporting the show. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On These podcasts wherever you get your podcasts from, especially here on YouTube. We're really trying to grow our subscriber count. We're trying to get to 10K. And once we get to 10K, there'll be a prize to give away. So make sure you guys all go and subscribe. If you haven't done that already, tell all your friends. And we'll discuss the Leafs hopefully win over the Philadelphia Flyers next here on the Locked On These podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you.